The 8th of June, 1944. Arromanches, Les Bains, Gold Beach, Normandy. A gray dawn rolls over the surf like breath on cold glass. The channel still smells of fuel and cordite. The beach coughs up shattered timbers and a bent bicycle frame. Offshore, a tug strains on a hawser as a rectangular hulk 60 meters of wet concrete slides past like a low, man-made island. On the shingle above the waterline, Royal Engineers huddle over a clipboard and a theodolite. Lieutenant Colonel G.C.B. Shattuck's 20 Port Group has been on the sand since first light, boots sinking into the same tide lines where infantry fought ashore 2 days earlier. Behind them, Bedford lorries idle. In front of them, the channel is about to grow a harbor. They call the great blocks phoenixes. Each one will be scuttled in a precise line to birth a breakwater where none existed yesterday. The plan sounds like something out of a fever dream. Build Dover out of pieces, tow it across the sea, and anchor it to a hostile coast. But months of clandestine design and drill have led to this moment. The first Phoenix is on station and the tide is right. A green very signal pops. Valves open, seawater begins to rush into the internal cells. A British sapper taps his watch and murmurs, "Hold her straight, straight, steady." Minutes later, the caisson kisses bottom and settles, a new tooth in a growing seawall. It is D+2, and Port Winston is being born. The scene beyond is a choreography of code names. Gooseberry's lines of deliberately scuttled corncob, block ships already kneel in the shallows to take the sting out of the swell for small craft. Farther out will come the bombardons, huge cruciform steel floats to break the sea before it can break the harbor. Inside that ring, the Phoenix caissons will stand shoulder to shoulder to tame the surf into a basin calm enough for ships to unload. Gooseberry 3, the blockship line for Gold Beach, began taking shape even before the first Phoenix settled. It will be the inner shield for the harbor that grows at Arromanches. Landing craft thread the gaps like bees to a hive. The first Spud pierhead, a steel platform with 4 adjustable legs, waits on its temporary moorings, ready to plant itself on the seabed while floating with the tide, a stable knuckle to which the floating roadways will hinge. Those roadways, the whales, look like steel lattice bridges set upon a procession of squat pontoons called beetles. Their genius is hidden in plain sight. Each span can twist without breaking, riding out waves that would tear a rigid bridge apart. The man behind this unlikely ballet is civilian engineer Alan Beckett, whose whale roadways and kite anchors will keep the causeways from corkscrewing away in bad weather. A flotilla of small plywood craft darts around, laying Beckett's anchors in a precise fan so the new piers hold where they must. By day's end, a skeleton of steel and concrete is visible from the bluffs, proof to every rifleman on the sand that the beach is becoming a port. The work is brutal and clockbound. Tides rule everything. Spud legs are inched down to kiss the bottom. A sergeant chalks soundings on a slab of board. A signalman flashes toward the tug to ease strain on the hawser. Every movement is made with the knowledge that time is the enemy as much as the Wehrmacht. Without a port, the armies ashore will always be dangerously thin on fuel, ammunition, and spare parts. In England, the prefabricated harbor sections weighed hundreds of thousands of tons. Now, one by one, they are arriving, and every hour that passes before they're in position is an hour the invasion lives on borrowed supply. When the valves are opened on the second Phoenix and she settles with a sigh, a cheer goes up that the wind steals and carries toward the French fields beyond the dunes. From the German battery at Longues-sur-Mer, anyone with field glasses can see the impossible taking shape. Block ships scuttled in a curving arc, concrete bulwarks marching into the tide, pierheads squatting on iron legs. Reports filter rearward through battalion posts and into staff maps. The enemy is building a harbor where none exists. In chateau-turned-headquarters, staff officers mark question marks in red pencil and whisper that such a thing cannot last once the channel shows its teeth. Out on the water, a Royal Navy coxswain laughs into the spray. "Let it blow," he says, throttling up. "We'll still be here when it does." By 15 June, the line offshore stretches for miles, more than 100 Phoenixes sunk in place between Tracy-sur-Mer and Asnelles, with roadways already reaching from the surf to the first Spud pierheads. LSTs nose inside the shelter, and for the first time since D-Day, the unloading feels more like work than crisis. Vehicles rumble down whales, tires slap across beetles, drivers grab second gear up the beach and vanish inland toward Bayeux. The harbor is not finished, but it is breathing on its own. Somewhere inland, a German colonel writes in his log that the British have built a port of illusions. He will learn soon enough that illusions do not take 16-ton trucks on their backs. The 19th of June, 1944. The channel changes color. At mid-morning, the light goes leaden, and the waves begin to stand taller than men. The barometer drops. Whitecaps streak the gray. On the harbor's outer edge, the bombardons pitch and shear at their moorings, taking the first heavy blows. A petty officer on a mooring launch leans over the gunwale to check a line and swears one of the cruciform giants is working loose. He signals frantically, upwind. Another bombarding yaws and parts tow, drifting down upon the still-forming harbor like a runaway wagon. The channel has kept its promise. The worst June storm in 40 years is rolling in, and the newborn harbors at Omaha and Arromanches will have to prove they can survive it. The next 72 hours are a kind of siege. Rain runs sideways. The air tastes of salt and rust. At Omaha, the American harbor Mulberry. Shudders under repeated hammer blows. Bombardons break free. Some Phoenix caissons shift or crack. Wells twist until their joints scream. Spud pierheads buck like trapped animals. A lieutenant commander files a terse signal ashore. Spuds in extremis. Roadways separating. Impossible to maintain structural integrity. By the storm's third day, the verdict is unavoidable. The American Mulberry is wrecked beyond repair. On the British front at Arromanches, the scene is scarcely gentler. But something about the geography, a slight lee, and the way the harbors have been anchored keeps Mulberry B from coming apart. When the weather finally breaks, the phoenixes there still stand in a ragged line. Battered whales can be mended or swapped. Port Winston lives. In the uneasy calm that follows, men in oilskins tramp the length of the causeways with notebooks and paint sticks, tallying what can be salvaged. A rumor spreads true enough to be useful that some intact components from Omaha can be salvaged and towed east to reinforce Arromanches. Within days, a freckled convoy of tugs and barges begins the work of cannibalization across the sea that pretends nothing happened. On a sepia aerial photo pinned inside a HQ marquee, an engineer circles weak points and scribbles. Add bracing, double beetles, kite anchors holding. The lesson is brutal and simple. If the harbor is to keep feeding an army, it must be over-engineered against the channel's moods. Repairs blur into routine. Spud crews climb their lattice legs to grease racks and pinions. Welders stitch new life into twisted whales. A yard of beetles rafted together becomes a floating workshop, tools spread out under tarps. The anchorage stiffens day by day. A staff note spreads through the port. By late June and July, Port Winston can discharge roughly 7,000 tons per day, a small city's weight of fuel, ammunition, rations, and spare parts. The numbers do not make good radio. What makes good radio is the sight of lines of ambulances fresh from the beachhead, dressing stations driving toward a Spud pierhead, the whale beneath them flexing, the sea slapping at the beetles as if to tug the wheels down. They cross safely and keep moving, because the road does not break. When the first DUKW amphibians trundle off loaded with jerry cans and crates, the harbor becomes a conductor of energy rather than just a structure. The supply rhythm settles. Coasters and Liberty ships wait in the lee. LSTs nose to a pier. Cranes and derricks swing. Beach group soldiers marshal loads with chalked slates. Drivers follow arrows scrawled on signboards toward Bayeux, Tilly-sur-Soise, the Cayenne front. On shore, logistics officers pin up a daily tonnage scoreboard like a football result. And for the first time, the numbers look like victory. Tens of thousands of tons in a week, then more. Ashore in barns and billets, infantrymen grumble about rations and boots, and the grumbling is its own kind of proof there is enough to complain about. Across the lines, German staff officers squint through rain-slick binoculars from the heights above Lens and Vers-sur-Mer. The thing they mocked in morning briefings, an artificial port, has not only survived the channel's worst temper, it is stronger for the beating. Signal intercepts and prisoner statements filter upward. The British have a working port. The American attempt is gone, but men in metal still pour ashore across Utah and Omaha's beaches even without it. In a chateau far inland, a colonel draws his pencil along the coast and mutters that destroying one Mulberry merely made the other the throat of the invasion. It is a grim compliment, paid in disbelief. Night falls on the repaired harbor like a blackout curtain. Out on the Phoenix line, barrage balloons tug at their cables. Atop a Spud, A sapper in a greatcoat warms his hands on enamel mug tea and watches the silhouettes. Ships, cranes, trucks moving on a bridge that floats. You can almost hear the logistics calculus click and spin the math of fuel per mile, of tank tracks per ton of steel, of biscuits per battalion made real by the hum of engines, and the quick white wakes of small craft stitching the basin. The channel breathes, the harbor breathes with it. The war, for once, seems to be breathing in the Allies' favor. The 8th of July, 1944. Arromanches, les Bains. First light, wind from the west. The harbor wakes before the village does. Out beyond the line of Phoenix caissons, a coaster eases her way into the lee, her derricks already swung out like insect legs. Inside, the water is a restless slate but tamed. On Spud Pierhead No. 2, Captain Peter Hargreaves, Royal Army Service Corps, cups his hands to shout over engine noise. Make that net fast. 25-pounder first rations after. A winch snorts. A cargo net rises dripping from the hold of a freighter. Green ammunition tubes glinting through spray and rope. You can smell the sea and cordage, the hot metal tang of brake drums, the Swedish breath of fuel from a tank landing ship edging toward Pierhead No. 1. The whale roadway beneath Hargreaves hums with traffic. DUKWs shuffle forward in a patient line, slat grills slick with salt, each one a floating truck waiting for its load, 303 ammunition boxes, tins of compa rations, spare track links for Cromwells and Churchills, canvas-wrapped 17-pounder shells for the Firefly troops who will nose toward Caen by dusk. A sapper with a chalk slate steps beside each vehicle, marks destination and priority, then slaps the tailboard twice. The DUKW idles ahead, the roadway flexes, the beetle pontoons heave, and the Spud legs greased after the storm hold firm to the seabed. The bridge moves, but it does not break. Watch your joint, Sergeant Lang, Royal Engineers, leans over the edge of the whale and points with a spanner. At the expansion knuckle, 2 spans creak in counter motion, the steel lattice shrugging off a cross chop that would have snapped a rigid structure like a matchstick. 2 sappers work in a practice duet, one on the ratchet pin, one on the locking plate, then give a thumbs up. Lang glances at the anemometer bolted to the pierhead, then at the horizon line beyond the bombardons, where the sea still shoulders against the outer shield. She'll do, he mutters, and moves on. On the shingle, military police in white gauntlets carve order from the surge. Right lane for fuel, left for ammunition, center for rations, medical and misfits wherever they can be wedged. A Bedford QL grumbles past with racks of jerry cans, each stenciled MT80 and clanking like a cupboard of iron. A Scammell Pioneer recovery tractor noses a damaged lorry to a makeshift bay where a Coles 6-ton crane squats over a mine of spares. Beside a tarpaulin that passes for a workshop, a corporal tattoos a ledger with pencil and wet thumb, counting the war in columns and totals, tonnage per tide, vehicles per hour, sorties per pierhead. The plan inland demands more than numbers. Second Army pushes at Caen again. Operation Charnwood has cracked the northern quarters, and the spires are smoky behind the front line. The next British bite, everyone says, will be bigger still. Hargreaves has a mimeograph sheet in his map case, stamped urgent requirements for artillery, ammunition, engineer stores, and pole to be staged by midnight to support the next hammer blow. It is a list without adjectives, the kind that makes a harbor into a promise. 25-pounder HE, 17-pounder APDS in smaller but precious numbers, Bailey bridge panels, pickets, coils of barbed wire, Bangalore torpedoes, bulldozer, spares, and fuel, always fuel. You can almost hear the paper ticking. Down on the water, an LST kisses the leg of Pierhead No. 1 and breathes out a tank, then another, then a dozer with a rivulet of oil running from somewhere only a fitter can love. A gunner on the bluff above Beaufort's 40mm. Sandbagged, camouflage net, stitched with burlap watches the ballet through a sight that has seen too many low, fast shapes in the last month and not enough of them hostile. The night crew of Beach Group infantry yawns and unrolls sleeves as the first proper sun warms the backs of their necks. The barrage balloons tug lazily. A black-burned skua gray sky clears toward blue. Mid-morning brings a problem loud enough to chew the calm. A DUKW belly full of ammunition takes a snotty wave at the roadway's landward brow and stalls half on the whale, half off. The queue behind flexes, then freezes. A driver 2 vehicles back swears he can feel the entire causeway breathing under him. Sergeant Lang is already there, windmilling engineers forward with chocks and a tow rope. A universal carrier claws up from the beach with a grin of tracks. 2 sappers jump out, and in one fluid motion the rope is on, the chocks are down, and the DUKW coughs back to life with a flatulent roar. The Q claps actual applause, absurd and perfect, and then the line crawls again, the bridge smoothing in the rear view like a sea forgetting its tantrum. By noon, the tonnage scoreboard chalked by the administrative marquee shows figures that make junior officers grin and senior ones hedge their bets. 6,800 tons yesterday. 7,200 if the tide plays nice today. Nobody romances the numbers. They are simply the difference between tank brigades eating and tank brigades waiting, between ambulances leaving Cayenne full and returning empty. A medical DUKW noses in with stretcher frames lashed to the gunwales. Orderlies move the wounded across the whale with a surprising gentleness for men who have forgotten how to sleep. One of them pauses at the pierhead's edge to look back down the long, flexing ribbon at the sea. Not bad for a bridge that floats, he says, and nobody argues. Hargreaves takes his lunch standing up, tin of stew cooling on a pier bollard. He has a ration of letters in his pocket that he has not read yet and will not today. His runner arrives with a motorcycle clatter and an envelope from Beach Sub Area to Pierheads 1-3. He reads, then reads again. New requirement. Additional 300 tons of 17-pounder, 600 tons of 25-pounder, 900 tons of POL to forward roadheads by 0400. Support to armored operations east of the Orne. He looks out to the ships waiting in the basin, to the derricks that never quite stop moving, to the chalk destination codes on each tailboard in his queue. All right, he says to nobody, because the harbor is the only audience that matters. We'll find it. Afternoon brings heat and the small necessary miracles of a port without walls. A coaster that has no business arriving early noses in anyway. The captain claims the tide told him to hurry. She is stuffed with crates of 3-inch mortar rounds and Hesco, no, not yet. Just Hessian and wire and pickets, but it will serve. A barge loaded with Bailey components bangs a beetle too hard and men on the roadway hiss, then laugh when the plank takes it and keeps it seen. Inland, the convoys knit themselves into roads. N13 toward Bayeux, then the spoke, work east. Signboards scribbled with arrows and place names you can taste. Epron, Couvrechef, Colombelles. Every mile gobbles fuel. Every mile ahead has been paid for already by the cranes and the cough of winches and the flexible backbone of steel that lets trucks drive where a wave used to be. Evening slides down the bluffs and sets the harbor lanterns aglow. The Phoenix line becomes a dotted necklace. The whales turn the color of wet slate under hurricane lamps. The pierheads thud and creak with the weight of another tide's worth of war. Hargreaves stands on the edge of pierhead number 2 and listens. To gulls, to winches, to the small flick of a pen as the ledger writes down one more figure that looks like victory. Beyond the last caisson, the channel lifts its shoulder and rolls. Inside the ring, the water nods, then lies down. On the bluff, the Beaufort's crew boils tea. Somewhere inland, a brigade major waits on a lorry park with a watch in his hand, wondering if the road will fill in time. It will. The portable port holds the 9th of July 1944, La Roche-Guyon, Army Group B headquarters. The Seine runs black beneath the chalk cliffs, and the chateau corridors smell of damp wool and cigarette ends. In a vaulted room on the first floor, a map lies under a web of colored threads, blue for Allied Corps, red for German divisions, yellow pins for bridges, and a new ring of gray circles drawn off Arromanches with a grease pencil. Field Marshal Erwin Rommel listens as an intelligence major lays down a stack of aerial prints. Herr Feldmarschall, the major says, tapping the coast. The British have made a harbor where there is none. Their ships stand in calm water behind concrete blocks. Traffic flows even in foul weather. He pauses. We believe it floats. Rommel's jaw works, thoughtful rather than angry. He had walked the beaches in winter, eyes narrowed against Atlantic spray, preaching mines and obstacles, telling anyone who would listen that the first days would decide everything. The first days are gone. From the photographs you can make out rectangular caissons joined head to head, like a dike marched into the sea. Within their shelter, strange pierheads on stilts, and a lattice road as thin as a pencil line laid over pontoons. It would be comic if it did not carry trucks. He draws a fingernail along the pencil ring and says, mostly to himself, if they can unload in any weather, they will never run out. Far forward, A Fernafclair, a Ju-88 with cameras in its belly, has risked the wall of flak to bring back the prince. The crew chief tells the debriefing officer that the harbor looks like a jaw. Concrete teeth outside, steel tongue inside, ships feeding it. He sketches a square with 4 legs to show the pierhead that walks with the tide. He shrugs when asked the names of these things. The British have names for everything. The Germans must make do with shapes and inferences. A signals officer mentions that prisoners have babbled about beetles, whales, and spuds. The words sound like mockery until the pictures make them literal. At 7th Army, command has changed hands again. The map labels cannot keep up with the telegrams. Dahlman is gone. Hauser now bears the weight where the map is most crowded, around Caen and the Orne. Reports pile in like bad weather. Epsom checked, but not broken. Charnwood has burned its way into northern Caen, and the British are laying in for something bigger east of the Orne that will soon be called Goodwood. The staff arithmetic is ugly and simple. To sustain attacks of that size, the enemy must have a deep supply throat, not a beach that closes when the wind turns foul. The throat is Port Winston. Attempts to bite it fail by inches and miles. A staff note proposes harassing fire from heavy guns near Le Havre, but the range is long and the Royal Navy answers by day and night. S-boot flotillas try to nose along the coast under darkness. The minefields and escorts teach sharp lessons. The Luftwaffe promises a raid on the harbor installations, weather, fighter cover, and the slow death of the group and promise excuses. A colonel suggests that a handful of heavy shells, properly ranged, could break the delicate joints of the floating roads. Someone else asks the obvious: how do you range guns on a target that moves with the tide and heals itself by morning? Inside the Ring of Phoenixes, this debate is academic. Out on Spud, Pierhead, no. 2. Captain Hargreaves' men unload 17-pounder AP rounds and stack them in crates rimmed with salt. By dusk, those rounds will be slotted into the breeches of Sherman Fireflies facing the villages south of Éperon. The harbor has become more than a structure. It is a tempo. The trucks move because the whales flex. The whales flex because beetles lift. The beetles lift because Alan Beckett's anchors bite the sand and do not let go. Every time a convoy noses up the bluff, the line on the German map thickens a little, and the red arrows pointed seaward seem to shorten by the width of a pencil. Rommel drives forward the next morning, windshield mottled with insect strikes, staff car-hugging lanes bordered by wheat and hedges. He pauses near Villa's bocage, where the lamb buckles into the bocage that swallows tanks and men and stares west. He cannot see Arromanches from here, only the sky above it, a busy sky, layered with contrails and the faint glitter of sunlight on something far out. He knows ports. Cherbourg fell on June 26. Its basins wrecked. Even repaired, it cannot drink the sea as quickly as the enemy needs. Yet the enemy does not slow. He says, almost gently, they brought Dover with them. His aide writes it down as if it were an order. Back at the chateau, Runstead is out and Klug is in. The calendar turns as quickly as the personnel roster. Phone lines hiss with orders that were bold last week and are obsolete this afternoon. The most lucid moment of the day arrives by accident when a logistics captain calculates fuel requirements for a counterattack that will never be launched. He reads his figures aloud and then looks up, startled by his own conclusion. The Allies can afford to be wasteful. We cannot. The room hears in those numbers exactly what the aerial photographs had said with light and shadow. A floating port is not a trick. It is a decision made manifest. German artillery observers, pushed back from the bluffs, still write what they can. They note the rhythm of ships entering the lee, the way smaller craft queue for a gap in the pierheads, the blink of lamps at night mapping a geometry of motion. They file one last suggestion. If the Mulberry is truly a throat, then perhaps the wind or fate will strangle it again. But the June storm has already struck, and the thing remains. Staff officers murmur that a second storm will come. None comes soon enough. By late July, the inland maps begin to change faster than the coastal ones. On the British front, the armor massing east of the Orne looks like stacked coins ready to spill. On the American front, a long, patient hammer is drawing back to strike at St. Lo. And always, behind it, the hum of Arromanches, the portable port that refuses to vanish with the tide. The Wehrmacht's window to throw the invaders back into the sea has not just closed. It has been concreted over, lettered in English, and fitted with bollards and cranes. The sea, once the German ally, has been captured and put to work. When Rommel leaves the map room that night, a storm flutters the trees along the river, weather ruffling the sand like a hand over a horse's mane. He pauses on the terrace and listens for thunder. He hears instead the muffled pulse of distant engines, the rumor of ships offshore he cannot see, and in it the truth that has been growing since D+2. The Allied armies are tied to England by a moving bridge, and you cannot outflank a bridge that begins beyond the horizon. He closes his notebook, turns toward the corridor, and orders more mines for an offensive that logistics will never allow. The 18th of July, 1944. East of the Orne. The ground shudders as if something enormous has rolled over under the earth. A line of Lancasters moves like a slow, dark hedge across the morning. And then the air tears open, bombs stepping down in carpets beyond columbells, dust rising in rectangular storms. On the bluff above Arromanches, men pause with enamel mugs and watch the clouds boil on the horizon where Operation Goodwood begins. The harbor tightens its belt. Orders flicker through the beach sub-area like sparks. Armor eats fuel, 17-pounder AP, engineer stores, recovery gear, everything that makes a heavy punch last more than a minute. Captain Peter Hargreaves licks his thumb, turns the manifest page, and shouts, "Priority to Pierhead 1, Firefly ammunition first." His runner bounds away along the whale roadway that sways under his boots like a living thing. The beetles lift and bow. The Spud legs creak as they climb and ease with the tide. Iron stilts that let the pierhead breathe instead of break. Down basin, a line of coasters waits in the lee of the Phoenix Wall. Derricks are already swung out, slings pre-rigged, block and tackle greased. A petty officer on a mooring launch wipes spray from his face and grins at the smell that means work. Hot rope, diesel, wet steel, and cargo oil. A DUKW grumbles forward with crate stenciled 17 PDR AP, the driver's sleeve dark with salt. Mind the knuckle. Sergeant Lang barks, jabbing a spanner toward a flex joint where two whale spans shrug at each other under a cross C. The driver nods, feathering throttle. The causeway dips, then steadies, the beetles shouldering the chop that used to own this beach. Farther back in the queue, Bedford QLs idling on the shingle-ware destination chalk, like talismans, Cagney, Borgabus, Breville names that will be argued over in messes long after the chalk has washed away. The harbor runs like a watch with too many mainsprings. On Pierhead 2, a Coles crane lifts a crate of Bangalore torpedoes and hisses as rain spits off a passing squall. A white gauntleted MP windmills, a scammo toward the engineer stack, Bailey panels, transoms, cord pieces, crates of pins, enough bridge to cross a river the map does not confess to yet. A Beaufort's crew on the bluff adjusts elevation out of habit and boredom. The sky over the water is friendly now. The Luftwaffe, a rumor that smells of old oil and apologies. By noon, the tonnage slate nailed to the admin marquee is a ladder of chalk. Artillery, 1,200. Pole, 2,300. Engineers, 600, and climbing. Hargreaves pencil skates back and forth between loads and roadheads, trying to square every promise he has made with a tide table and a wind that keeps changing its mind. He knows where the soft spots live. The pierhead bolts that like to loosen, the beetle that rides a little low because some fool stoved her float last week, the mooring that should have an extra kite anchor if anyone can lay it between tides. He pockets the pencil and goes to look each weakness in the eye. You learn a structure by walking it. Late afternoon, the first ambulances back from east of the Orne creep onto the whale, springs low under a weight nobody counts in tons. An orderly steadies a stretcher as the roadway flexes, and for a heartbeat his boot heels hang over the causeway's edge where the sea claws up and falls away. The beam trembles, the beetles lift, the joint mutters, the stretcher clears. The orderly breathes out through his teeth and says to his mate, "I trust this road with my mother," and the mate grins. It already had her worried. They vanish into the soft roar of engines and wheel noise and ship bells. Night rushes in with moths beating themselves to death on hurricane lamps. The harbor does not sleep. Goodwood can't afford it. An LST noses at Pierhead 1, kisses a Spud leg and lowers her door. A Churchill Aver coughs forward with a fascine lash to its snout like a bristling mustache. Hargreaves' runner returns with a message cylinder. Extra pole for armored brigades. Replace losses in 17. PDR dispatch road rollers and RE saw teams for bocage lanes. He whistles low. "Right," he says. and grabs a length of wet sisal to help a team handspike a slack line tight. Around him, the harbor makes its own weather gusts, born of moving ships, spray flung by windstrums, a rain of grit shaken from canvas and rope. You could forget there's a continent attached to this water, if not for the headlights falling inland like a rosary of sparks. 2 days later, the dust east of the Orne still hasn't settled. The British armor has lunged and stalled on ground that turns to ripples and fire, but Goodwood is not a single blow. It is a pull that forces the enemy to face one way, while the Americans draw back in arms somewhere near St. Lo. On the boards at Arromanches, the destinations tilt. Tilly and Ypres give way to Verrières, Fresnoville, then farther names, Falaise scratched in a corner as a taunt for August. The harbor doesn't argue with strategy. It only builds the road and keeps it open. July 25. The RadioNet burbles unfamiliar place names from the West Cobra has opened with a storm of bombs over the St. Lo sector. On the British front, battalions groan and lift totalize in early August. Tractable thereafter, heavy names that mean the line south of Cayenne will finally unbutton. At Arromanches, the routine grows barbed with urgency. A coaster arrives short of manifest. A clerk swears he had those 17 PDR APDS rounds in yesterday's figures and now can only wave a paper at reality. Hargreaves works it like a bar puzzle, swaps a load between pierheads, begs the tugmaster 2 hours he does not own, and lays on a last light convoy of DUKWs that will make the difference in some wood a map calls Quesnay. By the first week of August, the portable port hums at a pitch you feel in your teeth. It has stopped being a miracle. It is infrastructure, a word nobody says out loud because it sounds peacetime. The line of phoenixes wears weed now. Gulls roost on their corners like notes on a staff. The whales carry everything that can be named, and some things that can't. Mail sacks and chaplain's kits, spare barrels for 6-pounders, a crate of spectacles lost off a clerk's desk in Portsmouth and found again because the war is fought by men who can read lists in the rain. Inland, fuel cans pyramid taller. The roads whiten under chalk dust. The arrows on signboards point south, then southeast, then east again, as if the compass has been taught a new trick. In a hedgerow near Potigny, a German signals NCO scribbles by torch cone and listens to the night. Tanks grinding somewhere beyond the next field, the sigh of tires, the far-off thump of bombs that used to fall on England and now fall like doors closing behind him. He has seen the photographs of the harbor. He understands now what his officers did not wish to say. The enemy brought a port with them and kept it alive in weather that should have killed it. He tears the page from his book, folds it on the bias, and waits for orders that cannot reverse the tide. Dawn over Arromanches again. A low wind from the west. The harbor wearing its work with the weary pride of a man whose hands won't come clean. On Pierhead 2, Hargreaves watches a tanker lighten into jerry cans and thinks of Rose on the far side of the hedge, how every mile now runs away from the beaches. The channel rolls its shoulder beyond the Phoenix wall and lays down. Inside, the wells flex, the beetles lift, the spuds breathe, and the entire structure answers the only question that matters in war. Can we keep moving? The 7th of August, 1944. North of Falaise. The hedgerows breathe cordite. A column of Sherman fireflies idles at a crossroads plastered with chalk arrows and names that feel like dice: Potigny, Quesnay, Solangui. Behind them, lorries cough into low gear, tires whitening with dust. Somewhere over the horizon, Operation Totalize is grinding forward under a lid of smoke. None of those engines turn without a chain that starts on water. That chain begins again at dawn in Arromanches, where the portable port looks almost domestic in good weather. Phoenix, caissons furred with weed, whales ticking and flexing like patient metronomes, Spud pierheads breathing with the tide. Captain Peter Hargreaves has a scribbled list stapled to his day. AP for fireflies, he for 25-pounders, Bailey panels, petrol by the acre. The tonnage slate shows yesterday's climb and the day before's. He rubs a thumb over the chalk as if the numbers might turn to coin. We'll earn it again, he says. And the harbor answers with winches waking and mooring lines thrumming like cello strings. A coaster eases in, a petty officer snaps at a heaving line, a net rises with 17-pounder crates, wood dark as tea where the spray has salted it. On the whale rollway, Sergeant Lang limps a little, a souvenir from a Beatles loose plank weeks ago, but he moves faster than men half his age when a joint begins to mutter. Pin there, plate here, no heroics, he calls, spanner pointing. The flex joint shrugs off the cross sea. Lang taps the steel once, a ritual more than a test, then waves the next DUKW through. Beneath, the beetles lift and settle, each pontoon buying another second of smoothness for a ton that cannot swim. By mid-morning, the destination chalk on tailboards has changed. Villers, Cannevet, Morteau, Coulebuff, Falaise. The words drag dust behind them into the day. Far inland, the battlefield is tightening into a shape nobody planned, a bowl tipped on its side. Chambois sits like a thumb on the rim. The Dives River runs in shallow bows. German columns thread south and east, trying to pour out before the lip hardens. Totalize has handed the baton to Tractable. Both need a drink only a harbor can pour. The port receives what it once gave away. Salvage crews arrive with odd cargo bombarding, floats and spare spans from the wreckage of the American harbor off Omaha, towed east in patient bites. On a gray afternoon, a tug trudges in with a dangling cruciform, like a saint's relic, and a grin of rust. She'll brace the outside line, a naval officer says, and Hargreave nods, already sketching where the bracing buys him hours in a future storm that may never come. Alan Beckett's anchors, those stub-winged kites he trusted, like old friends, keep the grid iron flat. A French fisherman, pressed into service because he knows how this sea breathes, leans on a bollard with a coil of hemp and watches a Liberty ship swing in. Your port, she walks, he says in a Norman lilt, tapping a Spud leg with his boot. A pier with knees, c'est malin. He is right. The trick is not brute force. It is joints that yield without failing. A kind of engineering judo against a very old opponent. August 14. A telegram rides a motorcycle to Pierhead 2. Maximum pull tonight. Priority Falaise sector. Additional Bangalore and wire for blocking positions. Hargreaves glances at the tide and does the arithmetic in his head. We'll steal an hour from the western Pierhead, he tells Lang. And I need that kite laid deeper on number 7 Beetle. She's riding low. Lang salutes with the spanner and vanishes downslope into wind and spray. This is what the portable port has become, a set of choices made at the speed of weather, each one translated into men, fuel, shells, and miles inland. At dusk, ambulances return across the Whale, springs sagging under the quiet weight of success and cost. A chaplain stands at the pierhead with a tin mug and a prayer he keeps misplacing in the noise. Across the basin, a Bofors detachment practices on a drogue, the bursts stitching holes where the Luftwaffe used to be. From the bluff, you can see the Phoenix line as a dotted avenue of lamps, each one a punctuation mark in a sentence about intent. August 19. Chambois. The pocket hardens like drying clay. Polish armor claws at Mont Ormel. Canadians grind south. Americans push north. Between the grips, German columns try to sluice east on roads that glisten with spilled petrol and broken glass. On a ridgeline, a German signals NCO holds a field telephone that answers nobody and watches the west with binoculars that make the world a narrow, perfect lie. He cannot see Arromanches, yet he sees it in everything that moves, infinite small decisions flowing from a floating pier. He writes one line in his book, "They made the sea their road." He tears the page out and pockets it. Back at the harbor, the work has lost its novelty and found its music. A Scammell pioneer shoulders a dead lorry aside. A Coles crane swings a crate of 25-pounder HE with a hiss. A signaler clicks a lamp at a coaster's bridge and gets 2 flashes back that mean eye. A boy from Portsmouth, he still looks like a boy when he smiles, chalks totals on the slate. 7,100 tons. Then rubs and writes 7,300, as if the second figure might hide the first from fate. August 21. Word runs along the pierheads on a breath of salt. The pocket is closing. Men grin without showing teeth. The harbor does not cheer. It leans in. More fuel, more track links, more engineer stores to turn broken lanes into roads for pursuit. The destinations on the tailboards shed their hedgerow vowels and learn to speak river names. Seine Elbeuf, Seine Vernon, Seine Montes. Somewhere, a staff captain draws a new arrow and finds his pencil skating because for the first time since June, the line can be drawn long. Nights sharpen. August 25, bells ring in Paris. On the bluff above Arromanches, a Bofors crewman listens to the BBC on a smuggled set and wipes his eyes with a sleeve blackened by oil. Next morning, he is back at his gun doing arithmetic with angles that do not matter much anymore. The harbor keeps speaking its one language. Lift, carry, set down, repeat. By late August, rumors of new ports moved through the mess line, Cherbourg coming back to life, Le Havre blazing on the horizon, talk of Antwerp taken but useless until its waterways are cleared. None of that changes today's tide. The portable port works because it exists now, because the sea rises now, because a truck will miss a turn now unless someone in a white gauntlet sends it right. On Spud Pierhead 2, Hargreaves watches a tanker disgorge into a forest of jerry cans and feels the ground under his boots that is not ground at all. All this, he says under his breath, so a map can change faster than a rumor. Out beyond the Phoenix Wall, the channel combs itself toward evening. Inside, the whales glow like wet slate under hurricane lamps. The beetles lift and settle, the spuds tick in their sockets like knees that have learned a long march. Inland, engines gather themselves for the sin. The harbor has done its work too well to be believed by those who did not watch it happen. But you watched. You can still hear the line humming steel to timber to rope to hands winding the invasion forward one truck at a time. The 25th of August 1944. Vernon, west bank of the Seine. The river runs brown and fast, dragging whole hedges in its teeth. On the quay, men in khaki hunch over assault boats while shells search the far bank and find only spray. 43rd Wessex Division is here with the Royal Engineers, and every crate that thuds onto the stones bears a label that might as well read Arromanches. The boxes are not weapons, not exactly Bailey panels, transoms, cords, pins, coils of cable, a geometry set for building rivers into roads. A sergeant shouts, "Oars in, push off!" The first boats shove their noses into the current like dogs into tall grass, and men lean until their shoulders ache to keep the bow from slewing. Back on the coast that morning, Port Winston began its day like it always does. Phoenix caissons wearing weed, whales ticking in the swell, Spud legs breathing with the tide. Captain Peter Hargreaves, Royal Army Service Corps, pulled a paper from his map case that had crossed 3 desks in one nervous sea. Priority, bridging kit and engineer stores to the Seine crossings Vernon, Manse, Elbeuf, pole to forward roadheads. Additional Bangalore, wire, road rollers. He'd felt the weight of that list in his palm and in the whale spans under his boots. Now those panels and pins were arriving in men's hands cold and perfect, exactly where the river said no. On Spud Pierhead 2, the work had been lit by a hard, clear Sunday DUKWs queued with their noses to the whale's brow, tailboards chalked Vernon, Mantes, Vernon, Vernon, a chant more than a plan. Sergeant Lang had walked the flex joints with his habitual limp, spanner in hand, knocking at bolts like a doctor at knees. Plate there, tightened to mark, no heroics. A beetle that rode a touch low after a careless bump was given a deeper kite anchor and a short, loving curse. A Coles crane hissed as it swung a pallet of roadway decking into a DUKW. The driver grinned without showing teeth and rolled for the shingle, then the road, then the world beyond the bluffs. Now, at Vernon, the assault boats returned like beads on a string, some with men, some empty and scarred, one with a hole packed with a field dressing and a joke. On the bank, engineers lay out Bailey parts with a quartermaster's tidiness. Panels upright like chapters, transoms glinting, cord members stacked by length. An officer kneels in mud with a chinograph pencil and draws rectangles on a board. Class 40, first David, then Goliath. Nobody says the links, the river will decide. They say the order. Raft, then ferry, then bridge, box by box until the far shore is not far. A lorry rattles up with pickaxes, wire, and Bangalore torpedoes. The road on the far bank will grow through hedges and lanes not built for war. Its driver smells of salt and rope and has whale ticks still vibrating in his bones. He points at the water and says, a little proud, "Came off a floating pier this morning, sir." The engineer officer nods without looking up, then glances at the stenciling on a crate Biquet kite and smiles to himself at the idea that even their moorings have names. The first raft is a stubborn creature. Bailey panels become a square. Transoms whose names are felt more than spoken bite into sockets. Cord members of cold steel become a floor. Class 40 is a promise the river laughs at until a tank noses onto the deck and the whole contraption does not sink. A Churchill Aver squats at the lip and shakes its shoulders. A sapper waves it on with a theatrical flourish. It rumbles aboard and the deck dips, then steadies, then miracle and math floats. Men on both banks clap as if the river were a performer who has finally got the trick right. Word from Mantes is the same story in a different key. Assault boats, Bailey rafts, a ropework of kapok life, belts and curses to bind it all together, then a ferry line shuttling infantry and unarmored lorries until the first proper span can be thrown across. On a trestle of piled timbers, an engineer corporal writes names on the far bank in chalk that will wash away by morning Vernonet, Smarsel, as if baptizing the opposite shore into the British map. In the dusk, a Seine barge ripped loose by bombing slides past trembling and indifferent, a black shape like a whale without a spout. The enemy is present but late, as if their watches run on an earlier tide. Mortars probe, machine guns chatter from orchards. A self-propelled gun throws a few shells that find a church tower and flatten it into a sigh of dust. But the crossings multiply the way good ideas do. Every successful raft births two more. Every rope across becomes a guide. Every crate opened teaches the next pair of hands where the pins live by touch. In a lull, a sapper rinses his face and looks at the current going east toward Paris. Feels like the whole war is moving that way, he says. And the man beside him, who has never seen the sea, answers, started moving on a beach you'd have hated. Back at Arromanches, the night tide carries tankers that lower steel hoses like feeding spoons into forests of jerry cans. The tonnage slate, that dumb, honest altar, shows 7,000, 400 scrawled over 7,000, 100, and nobody pretends the chalk matters except as a habit that keeps the day from blurring. Hargreaves walks the whale in hurricane lamplight, listening for the mutter of a tired joint, the telltale slap of a beetle that needs a kinder angle. He thinks of the river bridges rising from boxes and pins, and of roads on the far side ripening under a new Sunday. His runner finds him with a fresh slip. Vernon. First class 40 span due to open overnight. Manse. Ferries continuous. He smiles into the wind and tells the sea, "We'll feed them till they outrun us." Dawn at Vernon again. The river smells of diesel and wet earth. The first Bailey Bridge takes weight with the same quiet courage the whales learned from the channel. A lorry rolls across. Then two. Then a column mud slapping fenders. Men peering over tailgates as if the east bank might be a different color. Downstream, a raft swings wide, then corrects. Ropes biting like reins. Upstream, a second span grows fingers toward midstream. On a chalkboard nailed to a poplar, someone has written a single word that explains everything from D+2 to this hour, throughput. The 27th of September 1944. Arromanches, les Bains. The wind has changed its mind again. It comes out of the west in long, slow fists that flatten the water beyond the Phoenix Wall and wrinkle it inside the harbor like an old map. The summer dust inland has settled into chalk-white convoys pointing for the Seine crossings and beyond, but here at Port Winston, the work has not thinned. It has simply become heavier with distance. Captain Peter Hargreaves, Royal Army Service Corps, leans over the rail of Spud Pierhead 2 and watches a coaster ease into the lee. The derricks are already swung out, slings hang like question marks waiting for an answer. The day's slate carries a new refrain until Antwerp opens. September is a month of paradoxes. Inland, the maps have lengthened. The front has lunged past Paris and begun to nose at Belgium and Holland. The Red Ball Express growls day and night over roads that were never meant for that much rubber. Yet here, the tonnage through the portable port peaks for vehicles in September and October, the boards say so, and Hargreaves trusts the boards because they never learned how to boast. Since June, over 600,000 long tons of British stores have crossed these floating roads, with the best week in late July and a single-day record at month's end that felt like cheating physics. You taste the numbers in the air: iron, grease, salt, rope, arithmetic made tactile. Sergeant Lang limps the length of a whale span, spanner in hand, tapping bolts and patting beetles like a farmer with proud cattle. "Winterize where we can," he tells a sapper, sketching a rough triangle in the air for bracing on a knuckle that talks too much in a cross chop. The bombardins' outside replacements dragged here piecemeal from the wreckage off Omaha Heave at their moorings like tired giants. But they hold. The kite anchors bite like old dogs and refuse to let go. She's an old girl now, Lang says of the harbor, so we treat her needs with respect. A rumor glides across the pierheads and proves true by afternoon orders. Fuel will soon begin to arrive through pipes, not just jerry cans. The clerks call it Pluto in their neat hands, pipeline. Under the ocean, and though the first line to Cherbourg underwhelmed, another set of lines toward Boulogne will soon start pumping in earnest freeing tankers and smoothing the supply pulse when seas misbehave? Hargreaves smiles despite himself. Any throat that feeds the front without asking permission from the channel is a friend. Still, pipes cannot lift Bailey panels, or 25-pounder shells, or the 1,000 particular mysteries a field army consumes by habit. For those, the whales will keep flexing. October 9. A pencil of rain draws itself across the basin and the wind smells of iron. The tonnage slate shows the curve has begun to slope from July's soaring figures. But the graph lies if you don't read the footnotes. The mix has shifted more vehicles now. There's still bellies grumbling across the floating roads, bound for British corps that are staring at Holland's dikes and canal towns with names that make drivers slow down to pronounce them. From the bluff, a Beaufort's crew watches the pierheads through binoculars and whispers that the Luftwaffe has become a rumor. The guns still track out of reflex, but the enemy now is whether and where. A whisper becomes a warning in the wardroom. Autumn gales. They come on a moonless night, first as a sulk, then as a push. Out beyond the phoenixes, the sea lifts its shoulder and rolls. Inside, the whales shrug and the Spud legs breathe. Steel on steel like knees remembering stairs. Hargreaves walks the length of Pierhead 2, with a hurricane lamp caged against the wind, listening for bad music, a joint that knocks, a beetle that rides low, a mooring that sings too high. At the end of the span, Lang plants his boots, looks into a spray that tastes like pins, and yells, "Kite anchor on 7 needs a deeper bite." The boat crew splashes out. A cable hisses, the anchor digs, and the note drops a tone right. Not sweet, but right. This is how a harbor survives a season it was never promised. Not by being stronger than the sea, but by giving just enough. When dawn comes, the pierheads are salted white and the men look older. The bombardons still stretch their cruciform shadows on gray water. The gooseberry block ships sit like a fleet of retired iron whales, weary and satisfied. Hargreaves accepts a mug of tea he cannot taste and reads the overnight signal. Maintain throughput. Antwerp not yet open. He folds the paper once, pockets it, and turns to the slate where 7,000 plus tons across a good day still make eyes widen. The sea will have more to say in the next blow. So will they. November 1, 8. The wireless net crackles with names that smell of tide and gunpowder. Walcheren, Flushing, West Capelle Operation Infatuate. If the Scheldt can be opened, Antwerp captured in early September but useless without its estuary will finally drink ships. The sappers on the pierheads don't argue strategy. They read the signs in their own language. Orders tilt, more engineer stores for Dutch causeways, wire in Bangalore for seawalls, spare Aver parts for men who knock holes in Europe for a living. The harbor's work becomes a bridge to another harbor. The 28th of November, 1944. The news arrives like a lid lifting. The first Allied convoy threads the newly swept Scheldt and enters Antwerp. A clerk in the admin marquee sets down his pencil and lets himself whisper, "At last." On Pierhead 2, Hargreaves reads the signal twice. The words do not magic the work away, convoys still need fuel and spares, and the road distance from Arromanches is not a suggestion, but the center of gravity is shifting. Port Winston will not vanish, it will hand the baton. Out beyond the Phoenix line, the channel smiles a thin winter smile and pretends it never broke anything. December is a slower drum. Hyperwar charts will later show the official tallies to 31 October to 628,000 long tons of stores, to 40,000 vehicles, tilde 220,000 personnel numbers that could be recited as victory if they didn't taste so much of cold hands and wet rope. In truth, the harbor works into November and lingers into winter, a proven habit the army cannot quite give up until other throats open wide. Some whale spans will one day be bolted into peacetime bridges. Some kite anchors will hide in the sand for decades until fishermen snag their ghosts. Today, though, they are just kit that held when asked. At last light, Sergeant Lang tightens a final plate, breath steaming in the wind, and looks east where the rows now run away from the sea. "We kept it standing," he says, not to anyone in particular. Hargreaves nods. The portable port has done the impossible so long that it feels ordinary. Tomorrow there will be fewer coasters in the basin. More orders pointing to rivers with Dutch names, and a kind of quiet that does not quite trust itself. But the truth has already happened. They brought a harbor across a sea, made it breathe with the tide, and held a continent open until a deeper door could be forced. The 3rd of December 1944. Arromanches les Bains. Dawn comes in frosted pewter. The Phoenix wall wears a green fringe of winter weed. Gulls balance on the concrete shoulders like nervous notes on a staff. The wind slides out of the west and puts a comb through the outer water. Inside the ring, the basin lifts and settles, obedient, not tame. Captain Peter Hargreaves warms his hands on a mug and reads the signal again, as if a second look might alter it. Antwerp receiving ocean convoys priority heavy cargo. Maintain throughput pending further notice. He folds the paper and feels the harbor ticking under his boots, the old pulse. Slower now, still sure. The whales carry a different crowd in winter. More vehicles than crates, more engineer stores bound for Dutch roads with shoulders like knife edges. Sergeant Lang, limping as ever, taps the knuckles of a flex joint with his spanner and listens for the clack he hates. No heroics, he says to a sapper who wants to bully the bolts. We coax her, she's earned it. They trim a beetle's angle, lay another kite anchored deeper, and the note drops to the right, kinda mutter the music of a bridge that floats and refuses to boast. By mid-morning, the tailboards wear winter names. Nijmegen, Breda, Bergen op Zoom. Drivers squat in the lee of lorries smoking into their collars, the smoke peeled away by a wind that bites like wire. A coals crane hisses as it lifts a pallet of Bailey, transoms, and cords bridges from boxes, still and swings them into a DUKW, whose driver bangs the cab roof twice with his palm and roars for the shingle. From the bluff, the Beaufort's crew watches out of habit. The sky above the water is quiet, but far east, the radio net spits hard news in clipped voices. Ardennes, Eiffel Street. Vith names that mean the war has one more set of teeth to show. Night becomes weather, December 16. The gale comes in on rubber soles and then starts kicking chairs over. Outside the Phoenixes, the sea shoulders itself higher. Inside, the Spud legs breathe like iron knees working stairs in darkness. Hargreaves walks pierhead 2 with a hurricane lamp caged against the wind, the flame, a small, stubborn heart. Anchor 7. Lang yells through spray. Give her another 30 fathoms and a prayer. The boat crew splashes down, the line hisses through wet hands, the kite bites, the joint's complaint becomes a purr. The harbor does what it has always done when the channel raises its voice yields without failing. At first light, the basin is salted white. A bombardon bangs its chain like a door with the lock turned. The gooseberry line sits lower, tired iron whales at rest. Men look older after a night like that, even the ones who shaved. The tonnage slate still gets its chalk, fewer flourishes now. More square numbers, but the mix tells the real story. Fuel and spares to keep long roads honest. Recovery gear and tires. Crates of glass and lenses for winter-blind drivers. Bailey for rivers that won't freeze on schedule. Hargreaves lines the figures with his pencil, like a man tracing scars, and then goes to where the whale meets the tide, because that is where the truth lives. Across the North Sea, Antwerp takes weight and keeps it. In mess tents, the port's name arrives behind the soup. Deeper berths, cranes that never went to war, basins that do not float. The Scheldt has been cleared at a cost the newspapers cannot carry without sagging. Now the ships go there first, heavy gear, long case machinery, mountains of ammunition, and the distances on the road shrink like wool in hot water. On Pierhead 1, a petty officer who has learned to read Hargreaves' face says, "We'll miss the big stuff, sir." Hargreaves smiles with half his mouth. We were always the road that started the others. The harbor learns how to let go. January brings salvage lists and maintenance orders that taste like soft goodbyes. A tug eases out to a bombardon whose seams need more than curses. A party of sappers pulls a whale span ashore to rebush a tire joint and leaves it there a day longer than any of them says out loud, an experiment in life without that section. The Beatles look affronted, then settle, then take up a smaller tune. See, Lang says, as if the sea were an apprentice. She'll stand with one less rib so long as nobody gets clever. The war does its arithmetic elsewhere. East of Liège, the last German advance spends itself in snow and petrol they cannot spare. Antwerp's cranes feed entire corps without asking permission from the channel's moods. And yet every evening at Arromanches, lanterns prick along the Phoenix line dot, dot, dot like a Morse the sea pretends not to read. The tonnage slate still climbs by hundreds, not thousands. Some days the queue of coasters is a short conversation, some days it is a paragraph. None of it is theater. Every net that rises here shortens a repair list on a road 100 miles away. There are odd cargoes again, like the first days. A lorry full of mail sacks and Christmas parcels that January forgot. A crate of spectacles lost off a clerk's desk in Portsmouth and found again, because wars are held together by men who can read in the rain. A bundle of flag halyards to replace ropes the winter chewed. The harbor looks almost domestic in good weather. Gulls on the phoenixes, tarred rope coiled like sleeping snakes, tea steaming in mugs that never quite get clean. The men move as if they have been taught by the tide push when it runs with you, lean when it turns. February 1945. Orders arrive with colder ink. Reduce commitments Port Winston as Antwerp capacity expands. Retain essential pierheads for weather contingencies and special lifts. The clerk who reads it aloud sounds like a man announcing the end of a song he liked better than he admitted. Hargreaves folds the copy, pockets it, and takes a long walk of the whaleboats, plates, wells, the places where paint wore thin first, every trick they learned the hard way. Sergeant Lang waits at the end with his spanner and an expression he saves for stubborn machines and partings. "You reckon she knows?" he asks, nodding at the pierhead under their feet. "She knows," Hargreaves says. "She was built to be temporary. Nobody told her she couldn't be permanent. They do not strike the harbor. They unlearn it." A span comes ashore and finds a quiet field where cows will nose it in spring. A kite anchor is dug out of sand that does not want to let it go, its flukes furred with small lives. One spud leg rises clear of the water for the first time in months. Men on the bluff cheer without meaning to. The map in the admin marquee loses its pins, the way winter loses days one, then two, then a clump, and suddenly the month is gone. On the last evening before the ledger is moved to a thinner desk, Hargreaves stands where a whale meets shore and watches a DUKW take the bump that used to terrify new drivers. It shrugs and rolls inland, tail light a small red certainty in a blue hour. Beyond the Phoenix wall, the channel lifts its shoulder and lies down. Inside, a handful of beetles knock softly, as if reminding the pier they are still awake. Lang sets his spanner on a bollard like a hand on a friend's shoulder. "We kept it standing," he says again. But this time it sounds like a line from a book he might someday finish. The lamp on pierhead, 2 gutters, recovers and glows. Far east deepwater cranes swing through another night. Somewhere between them and this tide, a convoy will change direction because a floating road once said this way. A breeze comes off the water with the old smell, salt, rope, hot brake, drums cooling, and Hargreaves thinks, not for the first time, that no one who did not hear this sound will ever believe the story. He smiles anyway. The sea keeps its own counsel. The harbor keeps time a little longer. The 7th of March 1945. Arromanches les bons. The wind comes in, clean and thin, cold enough to make the ropes sing. Phoenix caissons squat like worn teeth. Weed clings in green commas where winter left punctuation. On Spud Pierhead 2, Captain Peter Hargreaves reads a signal with the face of a man who knows what victory looks like on paper plain, a little ungenerous, perfectly clear. Reduce commitments, retain pierheads for contingencies and special lifts. Antwerp primary. He pockets the slip and sets a palm on the steel rail that has learned the weight of his hand. Below, the whale span breathes on its beetles. The joint mutters the old tune and finds the note. Work does not stop. It changes key. Sergeant Lang walks the flex joints with his spanner, tapping once, listening twice. A DUKW shuffles forward not with crates of shells, but with Bailey odds and ends, coils of cable, odd spares that make other people's bridges stand where marsh and canal shrug. A Coles crane swings a pallet of tires toward a lorry for roads that run east under place names new to tongues that grew up on English rain. Tailboards wear winter vowels. Nijmegen, Arnhem, Reese. The air tastes of salt and iron and a kind of ending nobody names. Far inland, wireless sets murmur about Wesel and the Rhine, about crossings done with assault boats and prefabricated spans built from boxes that thudded once on these pierheads. The harbor's fingerprints are everywhere now, not because it insists on its own story, but because its parts anchors with gulls' wings, latticework rows that bend rather than break, taught a generation of sappers that yielding can be stronger than resisting. Hargreaves tries to imagine the Rhine in flood and decides the channel has already taught him enough about water's manners to be respectful. March 23. The gale announces itself like a drunk with opinions. Outside the Phoenix ring, the sea hunches and runs. Inside, the spuds breathe, and the whales shrug, and the complaint in a single joint turns, with a shot of grease and a curse, into a purr you can live with. "No heroics," Lang says, the phrase having become a benediction. "Let her move, and she won't break." A boat crew leans into a line, A kite anchor digs, the wind spins itself, bored at last with structures that refuse to answer anger with stiffness. April thins the queue in the basin. The tonnage slate still gets chalked, but in smaller handwriting. A tanker arrives looking like the last paragraph of a chapter. The gooseberry block ships wear rust like old metals. Hargreaves signs forms that feel like farewell, salvage schedules, de-rigging plans, inventory transfers, and walks the length of Pierhead 2 again, the way a man walks a field he is about to leave to seed. He touches the boats they learned to watch in cross seas, the plates that took one storm too many and still held, the place where a beetle once sank to his axles and came up smiling under a deeper anchor in 3 muttered promises. There are odd cargoes again, as in the first days. Mail sacks, misdelivered months ago and found like stubborn good news. A crate of spectacles, chaplain's kits and road rollers, and a box of spare whistles for traffic sergeants whose voices have worn thin. A French fisherman with hands like rope looks at the pierhead's legs and says, "Your pont march encore, Hain. Your bridge still walks." Hargreaves nods. The words fit. This place has been a pier with knees, a port that learned to breathe with the tide and made breathing look like strength. The 7th of May, 1945. The BBC says the words. Men who have carried a harbor across a sea and kept it standing feel a peculiar quiet settle under their ribs. The work does not vanish. It goes transparent. That night, the Phoenix line lifts a necklace of lamps into the wind, and gulls argue like they did on any Tuesday in June. On the bluff, the Beaufort's crew listens to nothing in particular and smiles the way men smile when they discover that habit itself can be a kind of peace. Down on Pierhead 2, Long wipes his spanner on a rag that has known better days and says, "We'll take her down gentle." Hargreaves nods. Piece by piece, the way we built her. They do not strike the harbor. They unlearn it. A whale span comes ashore, seaweed combed from its lattice with gloved hands. Men joke that it looks like a bridge missing its river. One spud leg cranks up, paint bright where no salt ever reached. The gear shrieks, then smooths, then slides old iron remembering youth. A kite anchor is dug from sand that clutches like a child. The rigging crew coils lines into neat sleeping snakes and does not look back much. The habit of not looking inland from D+2 dies hard and slow. In the village, a child who has learned to sleep through cranes and diesel asks what the concrete islands will be when the war is over. Landmarks, someone says, and warnings. At low tide, the phoenixes will wear sunlight like armor. At high, they will pretend to have never been here at all. Some beetles will find new work under farm culverts. Some whale spans will become short, improbable bridges where a lane refuses to be interrupted by a brook. The harbor scatters the way good ideas do by being useful in pieces. On a soft morning that smells of rope and rust and something like forgiveness, Hargreaves walks to the end of the last whale, still in place, and takes off his cap to the wind. The channel, indifferent and faithful, breathes. Beyond the line of concrete, the water lifts its shoulder and lies down. He thinks of D+2, of a phoenix settling with a sigh, of a green flare, and men counting by tides. He thinks of a storm in June that should have broken everything and didn't, and of a storm in December that tried to finish the argument and failed. He thinks of Rommel in a room above the Seine, of a pencil circle on a map, of disbelief turning into logistics in a single heartbeat. He laughs once, quiet and surprised, and says to the empty air, "We brought a port with us." The wind stills it and takes it seaward, May 12. The ledger moves to a smaller table. Pierhead 2 is kept for contingencies, which is to say for the sea's manners and a handful of special lifts that feel like coda notes. Sergeant Lang leaves his spanner on a bollard for a moment too long and then pockets it as if he were picking up a photograph. In the admin marquee, the tonnage slate is wiped and does not get written again. No ceremony fits this work. The men shake hands like mechanics, firm, brief eyes on the machine they just switched off. At last, late light. The harbor lies quiet. Not dead waiting is a skill it learned early. The phoenixes keep their shape against the drowning of detail. The gooseberries sulk like retired warships. The beach smells of kelp and hot brake drums gone cold. Hargreaves ties off a line that no longer needs tying and looks east, where the roads now belong to peacetime sins, lateness, misdirection, ordinary weather. Behind him, the sea keeps its counsel. In front of him, a continent remembers how to breathe without being fed. He does not salute. He touches steel and steps ashore.